Welcome, Jörn. We're just waiting for 1-2 minutes.
Maybe we will have more viewers on the streaming.
Yeah, I mean, this can be because I also were. Oh no, some people are coming.
Sometimes it's easier to follow from outside. Recently, Zoom, but then they told me that in the Zoom there was huge amount of transphobic comments. And then I thought maybe it was better that I followed from Facebook. At least I did not get exposed to that. Because anybody can also join the Zoom links, etc.
But did they have some sort of like a moderator or something taking care of this? Like that, you know, people are being removed from the meeting?
People are coming in, yeah. But I think latest in 1-2 minutes we should start.
Mm-hmm.
We have enough time to listen to Max before he has to leave, before they have to leave again. Okay, everybody in the call that is willing to speak later, would be nice if you want to engage. If you could add your pronouns maybe already to your name. If you do not know how to do that, you just click on your name and there are 3 dots, and there you can change temporarily for this session your name. Thank you. So I guess we should start, maybe, no? Very important in the beginning, before we do the official welcome, the information: we want to record this session, and it is also live streamed. So everybody that is for whom it's important to stay anonymous, maybe to delete the name and also not to switch on the camera. We have later the day small working groups where yeah, we all work on different topics, and these small groups are not recorded, the breakout rooms, just the plenary. Okay, so I would start the recording right now and then start the session. Okay. So welcome everybody to the International Lab of the Urban Thinkers Campus Mannheim 2020, COVID-19 and the queer community, making sure no one is left behind on the local level. My name is Sören Landmann. I'm the LGBTI commissioner of the city of Mannheim, working in the city hall in the Department of Democracy and Strategy. And I'm your host today, together with Biljana Ginova, that I'm very happy to introduce as my co-host and also the facilitator moderator of most of the parts today. I would like to take the chance to introduce Biljana for one moment. Biljana Ginova is a feminist and queer activist involved within several national, regional, and European LGBTI movements. Currently, they are holding the position of advocacy manager at LGBTI Equal Rights Association for Western Balkans, also called ERA. They are co-founders to this association as well to the Euro-Central Asian Lesbian Community, ELC, where they were holding the roles of co-secretary in the board and later advocacy director. Biljana has been active in the civil society sector in North Macedonia since 2002, working with and for different marginalized groups. They hold a master's degree from the School of Global Studies on the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. And during their master studies, Biljana was researching the disciplinary and regulatory politics of neoliberal human rights frameworks on transgender people. So welcome, Biljana, and I give you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, for presenting me, and thank you for having me. Yes, since recently, actually 2 days ago or 3 days ago, since 1st of December, I'm advocacy manager at ERA, Equal Rights Association for LGBT Rights in Western Balkan and Turkey. So this is my first public speaking or my first public event from that role. So hopefully it will all go good. I will not put a shame to my co-directors and teammates. As Søren a little bit shared, we imagined this 2.5 hours of work split in two smaller sub-sessions. So in the first sub-session, we share experiences, and in the second, we work. So in the first part, we will have a panel discussion to share and underline the lived realities of some of the LGBTIQ populations, like queer youth, refugees, trans people, people who live with HIV, lesbians, bisexual and queer women, etc. in these pandemics of COVID. But we will also hear a video presentation from the independent expert on SOGI, Victor, what was his last name?
Madrigal Borlo.
Yeah, thank you, Borlo. But also both Søren and myself, we will give very short presentations of the Agenda 2030 and Mannheim Vision 2030 to help us guide the second sub-session, and that is when we work. So everybody on this session is invited to join the small working groups that will not be recorded or streamed, as Søren says, where we will have a chance to analyze the Mannheim Vision 2030 using the knowledge that have been shared here, and to analyze it through the lenses of the impact of COVID-19 on LGBTI populations. And hopefully to amend it, to introduce new indicators and new programs that can support these communities. So if nobody has any questions so far, we can start with the first part of this meeting, and that is the panel discussion. We already shared so much, and we already had a chance to read so many reports on the lived experiences of queer communities and LGBTI communities under this unprecedented global challenge. And the reports are showing that actually the COVID-19 has a disproportionate impact on LGBT persons compared to the others. Those who had limited access to services and rights, now these accesses are even more worsened in every region of the world. So also, COVID-19 has influenced not just the lived realities, but has influenced the development processes on a global scale, on a national and local scale, as we are here to talk today. So that's why I'm very happy to have on my panel brilliant activists and brilliant human rights defenders. And I will introduce you by alphabetical order, but then the talking will go with Max first because Max will have to leave. So with us today was supposed to be Anbit Zaman, but I think they're still not here. Soren?
No,
And we don't
still thing. I hope Anbit is, yeah. Join.
Okay, when they join, I will introduce Anbit then. So I'm very happy to introduce Anya Katrin Limon, who is currently based in Orum's Berlin office and holds a Bachelor of Law from the University of Ljubljana, a city that I'm in love with, and LLM in International Law from University of Bristol, where she focused on both international and EU migration law and policy. Her dissertation focused on the influence of climate change on human migration and the legal gap in refugee law regarding protection of climate refugees. Following her postgraduate, Anna worked in a law firm in Ljubljana, Slovenia. Before joining Oram, Anya volunteered for Amnesty International in Tel Aviv, working with Eritrean and Sudanese asylum seekers in Israel. So thank you, Anya, for joining us. Max Appenroth. I hope I'm pronouncing this well. My English is with my hometown dialect.
It's perfect.
Max is Berlin-based trans activist and PhD candidate in the Institute of Public Health. I'm not sure that I will pronounce this institute right, so I will say it is in Berlin, in Germany. They currently do an internship at the Development on Infectious Disease Epidemiology at the Robert Koch Institute. But Max also coordinates the Trans Men and HIV working group in the International Organization Global Action for Trans Equality and gives lectures and workshops around the topic of inclusion of gender diverse people, specifically in the field of healthcare. And last but not least, we have Silvia Casalino, a colleague of mine, a friend with whom we developed ELC together. Silvia has a master's degree in space engineering at the Politecnico di Milano. From 2001 to 2018, she worked for the French Space Agency in Paris. In parallel, Silvia has worked as a political and cultural activist for the last 20 years. In 2011, she directed her first documentary movie. The name of the movie is No Gravity, and in the movie star some of the greatest women astronauts and philosopher Donna Haraway. The movie was broadcasted on by the German television ZDF. Silvia also teaches management at the Sorbonne and Institute in Paris. In 2017, she co-created the Euro Central Asian lesbian community. And after 3 years holding the position of a co-chair, she currently is the International NGO Executive Co-Director. So Silvia, Max, Anya, thank you all for coming here. We have another guest, Manuel, whom I will introduce a little bit later. Whom I will introduce a little bit later in the day, because, okay, or maybe I can introduce Manuel here as well, but I will introduce him later again, because Manuel will provide report on the overall day, highlighting the main findings of the main highlights of the day. So Manuel Rosas Vasquez is the coordinator of Rainbow City Network, and he's originally from Mexico and was the representative of Latin America at UNAIDS for Crowd Out AIDS project that created a global policy to prevent new HIV infections among young people. Manuel specialized in international relations and LGBT policies, and currently moves between Hanover and Mannheim, working with the RSN Rainbow Cities Network Board to set the strategy and direction of the network. He manages relations with the RCN member cities and other international bodies and represents the network on platforms around the world. He holds a master's degree in public policy from the Willy Brandt School of Public Policy in Germany. Thank you, Manuel, for being with us and for taking the hardest task. To listen everybody all day and to report back. So to go back to the panel discussion, I will invite Max first to share about the experiences that they have documented that COVID-19 has on trans community and people living with HIV. Max, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my apologies again that I have to leave early, but as I said, it's just too many meetings in one day and I can't split myself, unfortunately. And I will give some insight about the effects of the COVID pandemic on like the level of mental health, physical health, and the elevation of violence and isolation towards my community. I identify as trans myself. And I'm just gonna dive right into the, like, let's say like healthcare barriers, because like, as you know, trans people, so if I talk about trans people, I do address people who do not identify with their gender assigned at birth. And trans people in general face tremendous barriers to healthcare, and this situation is even aggravated at the moment due to the pandemic. Because, for example, a lot of people of my community, they cannot receive healthcare where they actually live. They have to travel to different cities, to bigger cities, for example, to actually receive care that they need. And this is at the moment in some parts, it's just not possible, or even like it's very hard to travel in between cities. And that has not only an effect on, like, for example, hormone therapy. Some trans people, or trans people who use hormones to align their bodies with their lived gender, which some people do not understand. But for many of us, it's actually like it's a life-saving drug to get access to hormones, as well as, for example, a lot of trans people live with HIV, and at the moment, the problem to get the care that we need and to also get antiretroviral therapy, like the medication against HIV, is something that is very hard to access for many of my community, as well as, for example, other than that, for example, PrEP, just to get HIV prevention, to receive HIV prevention, is something that is hard to reach. And because of all the negative experiences in the healthcare system, some people, like some trans people, get, for example, their hormones or their HIV medication or even PrEP from informal sources. That means like from friends or a dealer or whoever else might provide, or might be an informal source, or like buying it off the internet. And this is something that is also at the moment, it's also like this is not really an option, because this is also often related to traveling, as well as also that the prices have increased, because like there was also in between, there was a little bit of a problem with the supply chains of drugs and medications were interrupted because of the pandemic. So in some regions, it was actually hard to get hormones. Like even in Berlin, there was a short period where I had difficulties to get the hormones that I need. By now it's solved, it's better, but this is something that we need to take into consideration, that the whole pandemic actually has like a global impact on which medications can be delivered in which regions. And another thing that is also like, which has to do with the bodies of trans people, is that a lot of planned surgeries, like for example, top surgery or like gender affirming surgeries in any type of way, they have been postponed to the unknown because of the capacities of the hospitals. They have they just don't have the capacity for planned surgeries at the moment because of COVID related cases in hospitals. And many trans people have fought for months, if not even for years, to receive these surgeries, which are even like for some people also, I would say, life-saving surgeries, because body dysphoria and the impact that might have on the mental health of trans people is something that is often forgotten. And that is something, you know, like, or many people are not even aware that because of the situation in the hospitals, that this has an impact on the trans community on that level. besides the physical part, or let's say like the access to healthcare, another thing is that trans people in general have difficulties finding employment. At the moment, a lot of people have lost their jobs, including a lot of people in my community. And trans people in general are affected, like disproportionately affected by low income or even living in poverty. And this situation got even worse during the pandemic. And what also has been happening is that because of the lockdowns that we have at the moment, a lot of trans people are actually in lockdown situations with like in a hostile environment. For example, with family members that are not accepting of their identity, or with other people like locked inside a household or in a like, let's say like a small space in whatever way, and that might increase actually the violence against trans people. And what we've also seen on a political level, maybe some sort of like in the shade of the news that like everything now is about the pandemic, so things can happen without people noticing, that there has been like a very strong push of anti-trans movements in different regions in Europe. And it's not only that, for example, also violent, like the reports of violence have steadily been going up for years now, but it's also that legislations that might even give protection to us have been withdrawn. For example, that in Hungary, they had a drawback of trans rights. In the UK, like outspoken transphobic people have made it into the parliament. They gave speeches in the UK parliament against trans people. There has been a huge pushback in the US and Russia. And those are just few examples of like how my community is under constant attack. And the stress of the pandemic, like we are all stressed. Everyone is stressed in the situation right now. But that added with the actions of anti-trans violence and the political movements that are trying to go against us, this is just like, this has you know, I don't even know how to say that, because it's the impact that has on my community is a literal fight for survival at the moment. And also because of the pandemic, we cannot come together. We cannot come together and strategize and try to target these anti-trans movements effectively, because like, you know, we are all doing everything over the internet. But for us, like, it is really important at times to also just physically come together and to regain strength and like use this as a tool of empowerment. And that's really missing at the moment. And also what, like the first studies, there was a study in Germany recently that has shown that trans people are disproportionately affected by the isolation caused by the pandemic, because a lot of community events are not happening, community support groups and everything is just, it's just not, it doesn't take place. And this is often for trans people the only way to socialize with other people. And I really, really hope that we can soon get back together, like literally together in a physical space, because this is really what is needed for my community. And given all these, all the situation right now, like, as I said, I come from like with a specific lens on healthcare. Healthcare is basically forgotten for my community at the moment, because it might not be the priority that we have, because it's, as I said, for many people, it's a literal fight for survival. And I'm really grateful for the chance to be here with you today and to speak about these issues, because as I said, not a lot of people are aware of what's going on. And I'm hoping that this might maybe affect some situations, or some like effect in a positive way, that trans people are being not forgotten. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Max, for sharing these experiences. I wanted to ask you technically, until when do we have you here? Are you staying until 1 o'clock or?
No, basically just for another 8 minutes until 12:30, and then I have to run. Okay, I'm very sorry.
In that case, I will ask the question to you now before we leave, before you go.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for sharing all these real lived experiences of people from trans community and HIV, people who live with HIV. I wanted to ask, do you already have developed maybe some recommendations to the governments on a local level as a city, but also as on a central level, on a state level? What should they do in a way to address all these concerns that you have raised?
Well, I mean, like, it's a general claim from my community about depathologization. Like in Europe, we're still being considered in many countries like as mentally ill. And what we've been asked for, like, or what we've been asking for quite some time is like to really implement laws that protect us and that give us protection, like legal protection, that also in cases if violence or anything like that occurs, that those are actually prosecuted or like followed up. And as well, as I said, the rollout of ICD 11, which is still, you know, it's an interim solution that I can live with, but it's much better than ICD 10 that still declares us as mentally ill. And by that, also we're hoping for getting better access to healthcare in general. That actually, like, I mean, like I live in Germany, and I usually say, like, in terms of COVID, I'm fine. You know, like if I have to go to the hospital because of COVID, I feel relatively safe. But generally, like the healthcare system in Germany fails me from A to Z as a trans person in general. And this is something, you know, like the need for better education of healthcare professionals about the needs of trans and gender diverse people, as well as, you know, like if we talk about the cross section of living with HIV and being trans, like the stigma against HIV positive people, like education, more education needs to happen. And I think this is something that we can also translate to the current situation of the pandemic, and that would actually increase the situation, or would give a better outcome for the trans community in general. And yeah, I mean that would be something that is more general, but like on a let's say on a micro level, it would also definitely help the situation that we're in right now. And obviously, you know, like for trans, one more thing, for trans movements, like we need funding, like we need funding in order to strategize, in order to combat the anti-trans movement and the pushback that we experience in some countries, and to actually, like, you know, also help trans people to to build capacity, to empower trans people to advocate, and to advocate for ourselves, and to work on a level that we're being taken seriously. And maybe also some, you know, I don't know, community relief funds for trans people, or generally like gender diverse people who are suffering from the pandemic at the moment because of losing their jobs, not being able to find housing, not having residency status in the countries that they're residing in, and stuff like that, to just really like on these levels to try and ease the barriers that we face generally.
Yeah, may I ask a question to Max before they leave?
Yeah.
I mean, many things that you are mentioning are related to the national level, or even global levels. And cities are, of course, not responsible for depathologization or such things. But do you have one or two best practices where, on a local level, cities supported their trans communities, especially now in these times?
I mean, like, first of all, being aware of these issues, like having someone, for example, like you, who works specifically for the city of Mannheim around the issues of LGBTIQ people, like to have people really like to focus on gender diversity, to have one person to be like, okay, we need an action plan for, like, even if it's just for a few months, to implement something where trans people can find safe housing for in case they lose housing because they lost their job and can't pay rent anymore, or they're being kicked out by their parents, or they have to leave violent home situations, like to have a shelter, like to build shelters for trans people, or making other shelters that are existing accessible for trans people, because we don't have that at the moment. There is no place for trans people, like homeless trans people, to go. Like maybe there is like some exceptions in some cities, but there's not a general rule that shelters have to accept trans people, not with the gender assigned at birth, but with the gender that they identify with, and to protect them in these shelters because of all the violence that is also experienced. That would be one thing. Or even, you know, like having specific programs, as I said, like capacity building programs on a local level to empower trans people, to give job trainings to trans people, with the background in mind, what we experience on the job market, discrimination and exclusion, and not being promoted because of being trans and such things. You know, those are known factors that even outside of the pandemic are there, and they're real. And this is something where cities can, for example, increase, or like can do something. Support healthcare system, build or offering education to healthcare institutions of like, hey, we need to do something about that. You need to learn something about gender diversity. We need to be better. We need to do better So like we need to deliver better services to this community. We're aware of the issues that they face, and this is what we're doing as a city now. That whoever like works in a governmentally or like city-funded medical institution or financially supported institution, here you go. Please do something about it. Like those are just a few points where I think that also cities can actually act and make a big change.
Thank you, Max. Thank you very much for these detailed answers and to share, but also thank you for mentioning the intersected identities, as most of the people that are affected mostly by COVID are. And talking about the intersection and intersected identities, I would like to continue this conversation with Anya, particularly from a perspective of queer refugees, so people who are facing different effects from different places, from different identities that they have, that they share. Anya, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. So my name is Anya Lyman, and I'm the program manager at ORAM, which is the Organization for Refuge, Asylum and Migration. And we're a non-profit organization that supports and advocates for queer refugees globally. So today I'm just going to give you kind of a short idea of how COVID this year, how the pandemic has affected LGBTIQ refugees around the world, really. And there's a lot of similarities, whether you're, for instance, a queer refugee in Kenya or even a queer refugee in Europe, Germany. So one thing to think about is that LGBTIQ refugees are doubly marginalized. So they're marginalized because of the fact that they're foreigners, because they're refugees, but also owing to their sexual orientation, gender identity and expression. So compared to other refugees, they have that added vulnerability. And again, that's whether they're in Africa, the Middle East or Europe. And because of that, so fleeing from their home countries, where being part of the LGBTIQ community is criminalized, or there's such social stigma around it, from your family, from your friends, from your neighbors, that you need to flee. Compared to other refugees, LGBTIQ refugees will usually end up fleeing alone. So not with their families, not with their friends, but alone, because often their families and their friends are exactly who they're fleeing from in the first place. So that brings us to when they have fled their country and they're in first countries of asylum or final destination countries, there's severe isolation. And this is always a problem, even prior to the pandemic. But then speaking about COVID, when we're thinking about, the fact that we all have to stay at home, quarantine at home, this isolation is even more exasperated. And often refugees are forced to stay in reception centers, in refugee camps, or in kind of isolated flats dotted around. And often when we're speaking about LGBTIQ refugees, because of their own safety, so not to be affected by violence and abuse of other refugees, they're often kind of put in isolated rooms, conditions for their own safety. But that will then have an impact on worse isolation now during the pandemic. So again, as Max mentioned before, people can't leave, people can't meet with their community, people can't go to community centers, events that kind of gives you that new family, that sense of belonging to a new community. And this isolation has a severe impact on mental health issues within the community. So again, because of the trauma, often starting in their childhood already in their home countries, then through the journey of being a refugee, and then being in countries of asylum, mental health is a severe issue within the LGBTIQ refugee community. And this isolation really will negatively affect the mental health issues that the community already face. Additionally to that, then because of COVID, a lot of services are closed. So for instance, services that, seeing a mental health practitioner, psychosocial support, that may not be possible right now, or if it is possible, it's maybe been moved, on telephone or online, but that's not the same one-on-one help that LGBTIQ refugees really need on a very, very regular basis, even years after leaving their home country, to really go through all the trauma that they've lived through their whole life. And then another additional thing is just underlying health conditions. So there are high rates of HIV within the LGBTIQ community, and other underlying health conditions because of the fact that, let's say, in their home country or transit countries, they've not been able to access health services because of their LGBTIQ status. So they've been afraid to visit doctors, been afraid to visit hospitals. So there are a lot of underlying health conditions that then obviously COVID just exacerbates even further, making them more vulnerable to the virus. And additionally, also employment, also as Max mentioned. So being an LGBTIQ refugee, sadly, you have a lot less chances of getting employed than if you're a national from that country, again, because of the double marginalization. So sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, but then also being a refugee. In many countries, refugees won't have the right to work even. And then added on that, being part of the LGBTIQ community. And then with this year, so many people losing their jobs, you know, employment rates being lowered, not being able to enter the job market. So then poverty just pushes LGBTIQ refugees to like worsen the vulnerability that already exists. And within the refugee community, really, poverty is the thing that kind of pushes the vulnerability furthest. You know, not being able to pay for rent in a safe apartment, in safe shelter where you can live, build a community, not being able to buy food, to buy, to access medicine that you need. And these are all things that really we see with queer refugees in Africa, in Europe, in the US. It really doesn't matter where you are, these are issues that we see everywhere. And then one thing that we often don't think about and that really hasn't been talked about much this year is the fact that borders are closed. So the lack of movement. So people fleeing from their home countries in places where it's criminalized. So like in Africa, the Middle East, they don't usually hop on a flight to Germany straight away, but they'll go through what we call transit countries. So these will be, you know, Turkey, for instance, Jordan, Kenya in Africa, Greece even, which is in the EU, but I'm sure we all know not exactly the most friendly to the LGBTIQ community or refugees. And you have to seek asylum in that country first, and you can get stuck in that country for years and years. And then you go through something which is a resettlement process. And because of COVID this year, you know, flights being cancelled, borders closed, the resettlement program around the world has basically stopped, meaning that queer refugees can't access these safe third countries, such as obviously EU member states, especially in the West, that are safer to the LGBTIQ community, or, you know, Canada. So people are being stuck in these countries that are pretty much as bad as the countries that they fled from in the first place, if not worse, because they have that additional vulnerability of being refugees. You know, they're forced to live with communities that they fled from in the first place. And we're not seeing an end to this. I mean, borders, you know, probably the next year are going to remain closed, or for essential travel, which sadly countries don't think of resettlement of refugees as essential. So that's really one thing that I think is one thing that really needs to be addressed in the EU, but also in the US, Canada. The fact that even if we're closing borders to prevent the pandemic from spreading, seeking asylum and finding safety should not be stopped. And thank you. I'll stop there now.
Thank you, Anya. Thank you very much for this insightful presentation. I would like to invite the participants to join in with questions or comments. You know, you can also share your thoughts in the chat room. Also, if you want, you can raise your hand if you want to ask your question verbally with audio or video. I will now invite Sylvia from Euro Central Asian lesbian community. Yes, I said it right, the new name. To share the experiences that lesbian, queer and bisexual women are having due to the COVID pandemic. Sylvia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Biljana. I will start with a small recap of what the ELC, Euro Central Asian Lesbian Community, as you rightly mentioned. So we created ourselves in 2016, and in 4 years of work, we have organized 2 different conferences, one in Vienna and one in Kiev, Ukraine, gathering a lot of lesbians from all over Europe and Central Asia, but also from elsewhere in the world. And we are doing advocacy work, we are working for our communities, and we are in the midst now to create a lesbian network of European and Central Asian lesbians. So what I wanted to tell you as an introduction is that end of 2019, so last year, we got in contact with the German Ministry for Family, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth. I think it's the correct English spelling of the ministry. And they were asking us to make a study to describe somehow the status of the lesbian organization and the lived reality of lesbians in, let's call it, EU plus countries. So it was the EU plus the accession countries, which we did. And we did it, most of this work was done also during the first pandemic, COVID pandemic crisis. So what we have found with this study is that lesbians are really an invisible part of the society, which lacks representation in all different spheres. I mean, with Biljana, we already knew it, but it was even more clear at the end of our study. And from the history of the lesbian, let's call it lesbian political movements that we have studied, we also find out that, yes, of course, lesbians are invisible, but in the same time, lesbian political movements were super important in the creation of the feminist movement, in the support and the creation of the LGBTI movements, and in the support of the HIV struggles and supporting the gay and trans communities. And so lesbians are working for a lot of different social struggles. So this was for us very important to came across this reality. And then we had done a specific part, which was a desk study, collecting all the studies that we were aware of in the academia, and trying to see how much of those studies we decided to focus especially on the health-related researches, how much of them were speaking about lesbian or were focusing on lesbian, because we were aware of the fact that we lack data on lesbians. And what we found out here is that we collected around 250 studies, and that there were a huge majority who was concentrating, of course, on gay and non-heterosexual men. And there were another huge majority, around 30%, which were generic studies, and only 8% were speaking, talking, collecting data around lesbian issues. So this was for us a very important finding. And then when you look at this 8% of the study, which is not a lot of information, you also see that those studies are coming from the most progressive countries in Europe, and also that those studies are conducted online, so they get the results from a very, let's say, top level kind of lesbian community. So lesbians who have access to internet, who are connected with the community, who have great study background. So it's a very small part of the lesbian community. And then even within this community, the studies are showing that lesbians are, of course, also an intersectional community, not only because all all different kind of oppression applies within the lesbian community. So for example, there are lesbian migrants, there are trans women who are lesbians, but also because being non-heterosexual and being a woman, it's a kind of an important a point of convergence of oppressions. So from those studies, we understood that bisexual women were at 50% answering that they were discriminating because of their gender, and 30% of the lesbians said that they were discriminated because of their gender, while only 2% of men, gay men, said that they were discriminated because of their gender. And on the other hand, we also know from generic studies that harassment and violence against lesbians are higher than for the generic, let's say, women kind of violence and harassment. So this was coming from the data part. And then we have the third layer of the study, which is about the foundings. Max was speaking about improving foundings, and also the lesbian community, let me say it in a very simple way, are very, very, very underfunded. And there is a huge lack of fundings for lesbian NGOs, LBT NGOs. And so this was also another very important topic of discussion in our study. I will move to the COVID specific impact on lesbian community. What we have done with ELC when the first lockdown spread out throughout Europe is that we have tried to stay in contact with the lesbian community. So we have organized twice a day spaces, online spaces with Zoom, with Skype, etc., to gather the community. So we open twice a day for 1 or 2 hours every day, even on the weekend, a space for discussion, to people just to be there and exchange about a lot of different subjects, but in general, especially exchanging about the impact of the COVID on them. And of course, to start to create a contact even when in a period where you cannot rely anymore with your community, with your local friends and community. And there, it was very interesting because there were all kinds of different impacts from what our friends from Serbia were telling us. The lockdown in Serbia was particularly strong on people over 65 years old. And so people over 65 years old cannot go out. So elderly lesbians who cannot rely on their families because they don't have kids, they were not able to go and get their pensions, and they were not able to buy food or treatments. So lesbians in a lot of countries where the economic is based on tourism were fired the first because they don't have families recognized by the government. So the bosses, they were just saying, okay, please, bye-bye, you will come back when the crisis is finished. There were also a lot of lesbians who were testifying that they were involved in the healthcare systems of their own countries. They were nurses, they were doctors, and this situation of not taking into account their specificity was really heavy on them because they were separated from their families, but their families were not recognized, so it was really complicated. And so there were a lot of things that I think are in common with what Max said and what also Anya said. So lesbian migrants were in a terrific situation. And all the specific case, we have tried to collect them as much as we can. But I will also add one additional point. Max also mentioned that there is a very political important impact of the COVID crisis. Here in France, for example, we saw that we were in the middle of the approval of the IVF, the opening of the IVF in vitro insemination for lesbians and single women. And this was stopped because who cares about that? So the politicians were doing other things on other subjects and considered that this was just not important. And this is the case also for a lot of other European countries. So what we have decided to do now, and we are about to launch that very beginning of next week, we have decided to create a survey and to try to get all the information that we can about the impact of the COVID on the LBQ communities by ourselves. So we will launch this survey. It's around 70 questions. We have translated in 8 different languages. We really hope to have around 5,000 answers to that. And the reason why it's important for us to do this survey is because, of course, as a network, as a lesbian network, we have maybe a different capacity or a capacity of reaching out to different communities within the global LGBTI spectrum. Another reason is that I think that we have tried to shape the questions in a way that we will be able to maybe catch some specific impact that in a generic kind of survey will maybe be more difficult to catch up. And the third thing that I think is very important when you do surveys, we have tried to have a kind of LBQ, lesbian, queer, trans, bisexual women friendly language, meaning we want to address them. The people who have translated also the survey are activists from the ground and not this kind of institutional, professional surveying people, which are very good, but which are speaking also another language. So I think and I hope that this survey will maybe make a link between a very cold internet tool and some real community which are on the ground. I stop here because I think I overpassed my 7 minutes.
Thank you for sharing about this, and hopefully we'll have a chance to hear more about the findings of the survey when you have finished it. In the meantime, I see that Anbit managed to join us. So because I did not introduce Anbit, I'm sorry, Anbit, what pronouns are you using? I don't want to make a mistake.
I'm gender fluid, and I came to the point when I say I'm indifferent to gender. So he, she, they, however, yeah.
Okay, then I'll choose they.
Perfect.
So Anbit is an LGBTQI activist from Bangladesh, where he worked for the organization that published the first ever LGBTIQ magazine in the country in 2014. Of course, due to personal security, they are living now in Cologne since 2016 and continuing their work for LGBTQI human rights in Germany and all around Europe. Anbit joined the executive board of Campaign Against Homophobia Germany in 2017 and has recently re-elected to represent LGBTQI youth from Europe and Central Asia to ILGA World Youth Steering Committee, focusing on LGBTQI youth globally. Anbit, thank you for joining us. And I would like to ask for short input on the experiences of queer youth due to COVID pandemics. As for everybody, probably we will push the agenda, we will make the agenda a little bit flexible, but the ending point will be as it was planned. So Anbit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Like all the other community members or different intersections in the movements, I think LGBTI community, especially LGBTI youth, were also vulnerable to difficult impacts and challenges from COVID-19 pandemic, which was something we couldn't foresee and couldn't prepare for. LGBTI youth faced, with social distancing, faced isolation at home, sometimes with unsupportive parents, for instance, where they couldn't choose an accommodation for themselves where they would feel more protected and also express themselves and have support. And even with LGBTI youth having supportive family, they lacked social support, as in community support, not being able to join public gathering or events, cultural events organized by LGBTI organizations or youth centers. And that has implications in mental health directly. I think it's quite sad to talk about it, and it's very alarming that there was a survey, and among LGBT youth, 40% of the youth from LGBT community considered seriously suicide. And that's something is a risk factor for LGBT youth, and I think it should be addressed and worked on within our community. Vulnerability. Beside that, schools were closed, and also no public events were able to take place. So there was also less opportunity for LGBT youth to connect with the supporting teachers or their friends and community members in a regular basis for extracurricular activities or artistic engagements, which also sometimes helps us to cope with the reality we are offered being an LGBT youth. Some resilient LGBT youth members actually took part in making the situation better for LGBT community a whole. We have news from international communities. For instance, in Morocco, a group of people actually chose to support LGBTI homelessness, where a trans celebrity on internet, on Instagram, published names of LGBTI members in social media. A lot of LGBTI members who are youth also thrown out from their houses in Morocco. And an organization started, a youth-based organization started supporting these people and offering them shelter. We have also news from Indian subcontinent or South Asia, where LGBTI youth organizations came together to, as an individually, with local support, they organized supplying food to Hijra community, a marginalized transgender community, and also organizing online events with Zoom, Jitsi, or different platforms to keep connected and keep supporting each other. Iglio, for instance, organized Unite Global Youth Pride, which also saw a huge participation from LGBTI youth activists and artists and people working who are working for LGBTI human rights and being youth as an advocacy work. They also came together for 2 days Pride organization, I think in October. And these are the positive sides, actually, how COVID-19 impacted LGBT community, where many of us thought of quitting living, or many of us went through or going through a very hard time. Some of are actually taking actions and trying to support each other and making it better for us, so we still feel that no, we can live and we can continue this fight for our life.
Thank you very much, Anbit. I wanted to ask the whole panel, Anya, Anbit, and Sylvia, are you staying the whole day until 2:30? And if you are able to join the working teams to maybe contribute with your views or your recommendations, what the city should do to tackle all these issues that you raised. Anbit, yes. Anya has to go, I think.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go soon. Sorry, busy day.
Maybe you can now share, because you already mentioned one recommendation that the cities should not forget that the refugees are here, and maybe to not forget that even the borders are closed, the refugees are here. So what do we do? You know, how do we improve the services regarding that? Maybe you want to add on this something else before you go?
Sure, definitely. So I think one thing is also to think that, as I mentioned, a lot of queer refugees will be put in camps, reception centres that now, because of COVID, are actually becoming closed, meaning no one can go in to stop the spreading of the pandemic. But that also means that no one can access the refugees within the reception centres, camps, and no one knows what's going on inside anymore. So just keeping that accountability that of course, we need to be careful of spreading the pandemic, especially with a vulnerable community, but that doesn't mean basically stopping any kind of accountable objective source and coming in and offering these services, because in the end, obviously COVID is a serious virus, but at the same time, mental health issues, all other health issues are just as serious, and that's not going away, and you need continued services to be able to access the queer refugees or all refugees in camps and reception centres, and to also, I suppose, to think of how, if you can't access services personally, how to think on how to better digitalize or come up with ideas of online community meetings or kind of online things that how you can support people without putting them at risk. And again, cities can do a lot when it comes to also accepting refugees generally. It doesn't have to be statewide. It can be city deciding to come up with relocation from, for instance, Greece, where a lot of LGBTIQ refugees are stuck. So it doesn't need to be at the state level. It can also be at a city level.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. I hope that Sylvia and Anbit will join the groups, and maybe you can provide a little bit more inputs either in the groups or afterwards when the group presents. In the discussion, you can provide a little bit expert view on the recommendations. As you know, we have already mentioned the independent expert on SOGI, and he was also collecting these experiences, what you've shared, but also from many constituencies, from many countries in every region of the world. And they prepared a report that they submitted to the UN about these experiences, but also about they offered recommendations or guidelines for the states to implement how to improve the lives of people who are facing COVID. Can we now look at the video, please?
Yes, I will start sharing my screen. And
Anya, if you are, please, thank you very much for the contribution. Looking forward to our future conversation.
Thank you. Have a lovely day. Bye.
So let's see.
Proportionately represented in the ranks of the.
So let's start from the beginning. So.
Excellencies, distinguished persons. This year we have faced, and we will continue to face in the foreseeable future, an unprecedented global challenge in the form of COVID-19. A year ago, I presented before this very General Assembly a report focusing on the social inclusion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and gender diverse persons. That report highlighted findings that LGBT persons are disproportionately represented in the ranks of the poor, on people experiencing homelessness, and those without access to healthcare. The sobering picture painting in the canvas of that report, announcing, without knowing it, that those very factors would make LGBT persons, communities, and populations vulnerable, particularly to the impacts of COVID-19. Soon after the COVID-19 was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization, I started a process of dialogue with civil society, state officers, activists, victims of human rights violations, and scholars, and have kept that channel open over the subsequent months. Over 1,000 individuals from over 100 countries have contributed anecdotal evidence, statistical data, and systemic research and analysis on the implication of the pandemic on LGBT persons. The information received, which is in the report that I'm presenting to you today, corroborates that the response to the pandemic reproduces and exacerbates patterns of discrimination, social exclusion, and violence already identified in my previous work. Criminalization laws, for example, further expose LGBT persons to police abuse and arbitrary arrest or detention, and deter them from fully accessing aid programs and services put in place by states. While contributing to social isolation recommendations by staying at home, LGBT children, youths, and elders are forced to endure prolonged exposure to unaccepting family members, which aggravates rates of domestic violence, physical and psychological abuse, as well as damage to mental health. In many jurisdictions, LGBT persons overwhelmingly rely on informal economies that are heavily affected by COVID-19 restrictions. The reallocation of health resources has intensified shortages of antiretrovirals for those living with HIV and impacted the ability of trans persons to receive hormonal therapy or gender-affirming care. But the pandemic has also created a context conducive to increased persecution. Hate speech inciting violence against LGBT persons has been on the rise, including discourse by prominent political or religious leaders blaming the pandemic on the existence of LGBT persons. Some states have enacted measures which intentionally target LGBT persons under the guise of public health. In light of these and other findings, I am convinced that the crafting of efficient and effective solutions to our current problems must address the reality that certain persons, communities, or populations are at a disadvantage when facing the fallout and the impact of the pandemic. To that end, I issued a set of guidelines to ensure that measures designed to respond and recover from COVID-19 pandemic are free from violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. This set of recommendations is a roadmap to improving the lives of LGBT persons even after we overcome this moment of crisis, as we aspire to build a better world than the one we had when the pandemic started. To achieve that, it is imperative that states ensure acknowledgement that LGBT persons are everywhere and are hard hit by the pandemic, support the work of LGBT-led and LGBT-serving organizations, and learn from their significant achievements, protect LGBT persons from violence and discrimination, and actively prosecute perpetrators. Recognize that indirect discrimination is a real risk and bring it to risk assessment in pandemic response design. To recognize that representation of LGBT persons in design, implementation, and evaluation of COVID-19 specific measures is a must. And finally, that evidence-based approaches must be adopted for the design of good public policy. Excellencies, I want to once again acknowledge the work of activists, human rights defenders, and civil society organizations which already operated under duress before the pandemic, but have continued to pursue their mission and to accomplish impactful work. Over the last 5 decades, LGBT organizations have forged a complex system of early warning, data gathering, emergency relief, advocacy, and follow-up, and have built a true sense of community. That system is profound value to the lives of LGBT persons, and it has demonstrated its unique ability to effectively and efficiently respond to needs at the most local, most personal, most meaningful level. It has been historically instrumental in responding to the HIV/AIDS pandemic, to fundamental transformational work in the recognition of LGBT rights as human rights, and the unprecedented work of social inclusion in health, employment, housing, and all other realms of society. The history of LGBT persons, like others subjected to violence and discrimination, has been one of suffering, endurance, and hope, a vital struggle for freedom and equality in the face of singular adversity. Today, I'm calling on states to listen to the particular concerns of LGBT persons, to address their needs in response and recovery for the pandemic, to respect their expertise over their own lives and communities, and to accept their solidarities in the construction of new realities of freedom and equality for all humankind. Excellencies, thank you very much.
So this is the video.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Soren, for this support technical. So, and I will also want to thank the speakers at the panel for sharing the insights that also Victor shared in his report, and the main
Dear friends, good day. I would like to warmly thank the UNFPA and
maybe you can mute yourself. So that the poverty, as Anya said it, is a thing that pushes the vulnerabilities even further. And you all raised that is affecting all different LGBTIQ communities. Due to COVID, our communities have much more limited access to health, safety and security, limited access to mental health and mental health support. And also there is a recorded increase of hate speech and hate crimes, including domestic violence. So I also want to thank to independent experts for documenting these cases and submitting this report to the UN, but also to creating this guidance that, in my opinion, they are applicable also for the municipalities. Therefore, I will repeat them before we go to the break because I believe they are important to be remembered. So the Aspire guidelines include acknowledgement that LGBT and gender diverse people are everywhere and that they are hardly affected by the pandemic. Support the work of LGBT civil society and human rights defenders. Protect LGBT persons from violence and discrimination in the pandemic context. And of course, prosecute the perpetrators. Indirect discrimination is real and significant risk. Representation of LGBT persons in the process of design, implementation, and evaluation of specific measures is a must. And that is basically what we are doing here today. And evidence and data collection concerning the impact of COVID and LGBTI people. And on that fine note, I would like to invite all of us for a 15 minutes wellness break and to meet here at 1:25 to hold this knowledge, to sink it in a little bit, and then we can come back and to continue our work. So can we all meet here at 1:25 as well? You can also stay on the link. You can just mute yourself and turn off the camera. Thank you all.
Thank you very much and see you later. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So,
you know, after the break, half of the people did not return, like in the school days. But thank you very much for the brave ones who came back for the working part of the session. So in this part, Soren and myself will give a very short presentation. Me of Agenda 2030, even though most of us are already familiarized, but very briefly, and I will not maybe present the Agenda 2030 as such, but more how can we use it for LGBTI advocacy. For those of you who don't know, the agenda was adopted on 25th of September 2015 with acclamation by more than 150 states that were present at the General Assembly in New York at that moment. And the document, and with that, they said that we, as the states of the world, we pledge to work in achievement of sustainable development for all. So the document introduced 17 sustainable development goals, or as we call SDGs, and 169 specific targets to demonstrate the determination in achieving global development based on human rights framework. As we know, probably the key premise of this document of Agenda 2030 is that no one will be left behind. The document does not specifically mention key populations, does not specifically mention LGBTI, does not specifically mention sexual orientation or gender identity. However, we can see ourselves in the premise of no one being left behind. There is one video prepared on this premise, and I would like us to see the video first before we continue on the specific sustainable goals. Soren, would you please help me? You can open my presentation, and on the second slide is the...
I can also share here this, 1 second.
Thank you.
So.
I was refugee in Pakistan. I was refugee in Iran. I was refugee in Dubai. And now I'm a refugee in France.
Les gens, quand tu es handicapé, ils n'essaient même pas de voir ce que tu es capable de faire, mais c'est tout juste à travers ton handicap.
Haberme venido no fue una buena idea. यहाँ की लड़कियां कुछ नहीं कर सकती.
लाइट रहित, उजियार रहित, हमरो बाल बचाओ उजियार रहित.
Agama me funidam bem e sabe na me bem muskel na me khot.
Porque se todo mundo tivesse alimento em casa, ela podia raciocinar. Então, poderia ser pobre, mas teria inteligência na cabeça para poder sair dali.
paske na mukili mutu azwa na mission na onza mbatindela ngape naza mukili pona mission na ngai me nzambe ndayebi.
I've left my husband to be with a woman, and for me that's a huge step in my country as an African woman to do that. I do have a strong voice, and I'm strong as a woman speaking for myself.
Nous devons dire au monde que nous existons, que vous êtes là. Et je suis sûr qu'aucune misère, aucune pauvreté extrême n'est pas une fatalité. On peut la combattre.
Afaka ihany fa mba tsy hitovy am'le hoe toerana nisy ato iny zany fa mba lasa ambonimbony kokoa zany izy tantrony regny de fa mihina teo zany any an-tenoana.
Yeah, I'm thankful for all these organizations who prepared this video, because I wouldn't be able to share it so well, the meaning of leaving no one behind, and how no matter how intersected our identities are and how intersected our lives and lived experiences are, we must demand to be included in the development processes. Even though the language is not specific, we can see entry points in the language. Thus, in the goal 1, so I did not take out all the 17 goals. I take only few as an example of how we can read the document. So for example, the goal 1 is end poverty in all its forms everywhere. And today, from all of the speakers in the panel, we've heard that the poverty is a key element that affects our LGBTIQ communities, and particularly now under the COVID pandemic, that is increased. So for example, if we read the target 1.1, and then we see all people everywhere, queer people, people of color, people with intersected identities are belonging in all people. So we can advocate using these documents. Or for example, in the target 1.3, implement nationally appropriate social protection systems and measures for all, as we also listed it as a specific need earlier in the discussion. Then when we talk about all women and men, this is also something that we among queer activists have debated a lot. Who is presented here? Maybe the people who were drafting this text were thinking only about cis men and cis women, but without going into that discourse analysis, in advocacy we can say, I am also a man or a woman if you are trans man or a trans woman. Of course, unfortunately, the document is also very binary, and the language is within the binaries. But again, even for us non-binary people and gender non-conforming people, we can find some entry points, like, for example, equal rights to access economic services. All people everywhere, on that language as well. Maybe the next slide, Soren. So to move on the goal 3, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. This is also something that all of the speakers at the panel mentioned, that this access is now, it has been limited for our communities, but it is even more limited due to COVID. But again, even in this language, we can see some entry points, like for example, in target 3.7, which says by 2030, ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive healthcare services. And I think these targets must be implemented. And that is one thing that is very unique about this declaration, is that the declaration does not, the Agenda 2030 does not speak only with the states, but it speaks with all stakeholders on in the states, and that includes the municipalities as well. That includes the civil society as well. That includes the private sector as well. Therefore, this is relevant also for today's discussion and for discussion when we think how we can improve the state approach to LGBTIQ people affected by COVID-19. Access about the health was mentioned by many of you, that the regular access to health, like for example, for transition, for trans people, or for biological insemination for lesbian women, now is interrupted due to these processes and is prolonged. So it's not considered as a necessity or something urgent, not taking into account the toll that it has on the mental health and the personal well-being of those people who cannot access it. So if we move to the goal 4, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education, if we can move to the next slide, and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Even in the title of the goal, we can read this language and we can use it in our reports, in our shadow reports, in our advocacy documents to all stakeholders, to the state, to the municipality, to the regional government, etc. So in this context, for example, if we see the target 4.7, that says by 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyle. And now the important topics: education about human rights, gender equality, promotion of culture and peace, of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural differences. So in all these points, we can talk about all the diversity of our communities and access to human rights and access to gender equality. The list continues with goal 5, goal 10, and goal 16 is very important, again, is a very important entry points, but I will not continue listing them. You can receive this presentation if you want. You can write, maybe we can provide an email, Soren, where people can write us. The key point is that we can use this document for our advances, and many organizations has already done it. For example, myself and a colleague of mine, we have prepared a spotlight report on North Macedonia to list the experiences of LGBTIQ people in the development process, and how, even though this document is talking about leaving no one behind, how some of us have been left behind and are still being left behind, as you all shared during the panel discussion. But this kind of documents actually are helping. Yesterday, I had a chance to hear about the similar report that was prepared by activists in Malawi. And then after preparation of the spotlight reports documenting the experiences of LGBTI people in the development framework, the state actually approached them, and the state actually copy-pasted their report into the state official voluntary national review, which is a huge access in advocacy towards accessing human rights and services for LGBTQI people. There are few more examples, not that many, but one also important thing to mention here, because we don't have time to go into the overall structure of the development framework and how to use it, but the high-level political forum, the place where we discuss about the progress and the implementation of the development programs of Agenda 2030 in the states and in the municipalities, there is a major groups and stakeholders who sit at the table and contribute with their opinions. And since 2019, we are proud to announce that there is also LGBTI stakeholders group. And all of you who are interested to join this work and to advocate in that space for your agendas, for the agendas of the communities that you represent here today, please contact me and I can connect you with the people who are coordinating that stakeholder group. But the most important is that that stakeholder groups, that LGBTI stakeholder group provides a seat at the table where the development processes are discussed for our queer communities from every region of the world. I will stop here for now, but I'm here during the whole session for additional questions. And yes, as the final slide of my presentation said, that is important because if we do not advocate on that table for our rights, nobody else will. So it's on us. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Soren to share maybe a little bit about the Mannheim Vision 2030, because Mannheim is one of the few cities in the world who actually prepares their own voluntary national review and submits it to the UN. Soren, please, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. I also will start with a very short video about our process Mannheim 2030, and then give you a very short input afterwards.
30. One city, one world. A better world for everyone. To achieve this goal by 2030, the United Nations adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals, as well as proposals for their implementation. Suggestions were also submitted by residents of Mannheim, as one of 25 selected municipalities worldwide, because cities are the foundation for achieving these goals. The question is, based on the 17 goals, how will the city of the future look? Politicians and municipal governments have worked together with the city's residents to find answers to this question. The cornerstone of the Mannheim Path is civic participation. This new policy is the basis for universal democratic participation of all in shaping the future of Mannheim. The new online participation portal and the list of all projects in the city provide the necessary information. Together, we are developing guiding principles for Mannheim 2030 that will specify how Mannheim will implement the 17 goals and what its focuses will be. Mannheim 2030 will become the binding foundation for decision-making on all municipal projects. A unique approach, sponsored by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. The mission is subdivided into 3 categories. First, what will we do locally to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in Mannheim? Examples include increasing construction of social housing, expanding and improving educational programs, and the active inclusion of immigrants. Second, what is Mannheim doing locally that has a global impact? For example, the city government buys fair trade products, which then improves the livelihoods of people in the countries of origin, or introduces multi-use coffee cups, saving waste and therefore CO2. Third, how can Mannheim help other municipalities to achieve their sustainability goals? This is already happening in one of our befriended cities, Kilis, in Turkey, where an education center for female refugees from Syria is being jointly established. This enables the women to develop their own careers and to live their lives in dignity. The Mannheim Path has already attracted national and international recognition and support. Mannheim 2030 and the Mannheim Path are contributing to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and thus ensure the city's future with less waste, more social justice, more international exchange, an intact natural environment thanks to clean energy, a growing economy thanks to innovation and investments, and better healthcare and education for all. Let's shape the future of our city together. Find out today how you can get involved in Mannheim 2030.
Okay. So let's go to the presentation. So, I mean, we heard a lot about Agenda 2030 now already. And the question is, why is it so important for us as a city? And I want to start with a quote from Wellington E. Webb, that was the former mayor of Denver, who said the 19th century was a century of empires, the 20th century was a century of nation states, and the 21st century will be a century of cities. Why is he saying this? I mean, the key word is urbanization. And if we look at numbers, we see that only 0.5% of the Earth's surface is urbanized, but 54% of the world's population is living in cities, and even 80% of global economic output comes from urban areas. So what does this mean? That like big challenges like climate change or international terrorism are, on the one hand, are targeting people living in urban areas and cities more than people in rural areas. But on the other hand, you also can be successful in these global challenges when you are successful on the local level. So cities play a very, very key role. And the same is with the Agenda 2030, but not only. There are many global programs that are then worked on the local level. For example, declarations for people with disabilities, climate protection plans, cultural diversity, or equality of women and men in local life. We do this in Mannheim too, and of course we also want to work on the Agenda 2030. And how do we do that? So in the past, we already had like an overall strategy. This was also before Agenda 2030 was introduced. And we are measuring in all departments through a target system, performance indicators and impact indicators. I want to explain this very short. For me, for example, this means that performance indicator would be that I'm doing a rainbow reception once a year, or doing 10 other events. But I mean, this is not indicating if these events are of good quality. So we also have impact indicators that are, for example, how many people are attending these events, or how many NGOs are engaging with my commission. So this is something I'm not so easily can influence just through good quality. And that's why this is an impact indicator. We already saw that when it comes to Agenda 2030, the SDGs, they also have these global indicators, like 231 unique global indicators for the 17 goals. And these are also brought then down to the national level, to state strategies, and then in the end coming to the local council level. And the important thing for us was now, when we are talking about the Mannheim Mission Statement 2030, our vision for our city, society in 10 years, how these very important goals of the Agenda 2030 are taken into account in our overall strategy. So our idea was that Mannheim 2030 mission statement is based on the SDGs, and that it also has an impact on the budget plan for our city. And the process was then very complex. So citizens, local politics, but also initiatives, associations, and organizations were invited to join a very complex process that were over 1 year through different, I'm not going into details here, online discussions and meetings, and people were randomly selected to talk to the mayor and all that stuff. And yeah, in the end, we produced this Mannheim Mission Statement 2030. And it is also, as Diana already said, or as the video also showed, this mission statement is taking into account and referring to different levels, like what we can do on the local level that has a direct impact, then the indirect global effects of our local decisions, and also how we can help others on the third level to reach their goals. And all these things are implemented and thought through in our Mannheim 2030 mission statement. I now want to, and that's the most important part now, talk to you about how are these strategic goals are look like now. We have 7 strategic goals, and most of these strategic goals refer to several of the SDGs. So one is social and cultural integration, societal cooperation, and lifelong learning. One is equality. Oh, the number 2 is down there. Health, well-being, and demographic change. The 3rd strategic goal would be equality, diversity, and integration. The 4th would be democracy, dedication, and participation. And then we have our strategic goal number 5, digitalization, innovation, and future-proof added value. Number 6 is climate, environment, and alternative mobility. And international cooperation, global responsibility, and consumption would be the 7th last goal. And for us is now important, how these the mission statement that was written before Corona and COVID pandemic, is everything that is written in there still up to state of the art, or are we, as we now heard from the input from the plenary and the panel from the experts, are there things that need to be amended and adjusted? Because we learned that, for example, some vulnerable groups, especially in our case from the queer community, need more attention or really other strategic measures that are maybe not even just focusing on them, but to also other vulnerable groups. So for us, it would be important. I mean, we cannot work on all these 7 goals now, today. Would be nice, but not realistic. So we have to focus on 1 or 2 goals. And that's where I hand over again to Biljana for the Mentimeter quiz. But one last thing that I want to mention is, when we're working on this now in the small working group, please have in mind that, of course, the mission statement was a very, very complex process, as you heard, and that it's maybe unrealistic now to that we can add what we want and lots of text. So have in mind that if you're making recommendations for the local policymakers, that these maybe are written a bit general, that they are helpful for our community, but also maybe for other vulnerable groups. And even if it's not possible to add to the direct mission statement things, then we definitely would come, or we could write a document that is like an amendment or an attachment to this mission statement concerning or focusing on the impact of the COVID crisis and what we have to learn to make sure that no one is left behind on the local level for especially our queer community. But I end my presentation here and yes, give over to Biljana again. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you, Soren. So when we were designing the workshop with Soren together, we were expecting to have at least 20 people, and then that we will split in 3-4 different groups to work on different priorities. But since we are a very small group, and some of you have already wrote me that you should leave earlier, around 2. So my suggestion would be maybe to do a prioritization or to decide on 1 goal of the list and for us to work together here. But maybe for that we can turn off the streaming. So for us to feel more comfortable to share more openly, etc., because it's a working process. And afterwards we can come back with streaming and to present what we have created in a working group. Would that be okay for all?
To be honest, I guess one goal would be really more helpful than two, because yeah, we're not so many people. I'm pretty sure some are watching the stream, but at least they can't participate. So yeah, let's just have one. But we can do it like I'm putting up this slide that we're in the working group and coming back to the plenary later for the results.
Thank you. And in the meantime, then I will share my screen with you because I've created this Mentimeter, and it's the first one that I have created it. So I hope it will work. So if you see my screen, I hope you do.
We do.
You will see the menti.com. You go on your devices, either a cell phone or computer or pad, whatever, and then type these codes. And when you are there, I will like to ask you, based on everything you've heard so far and based of your interest, which one would you like us to work on now? Or which one do you think is the most urgent to be analyzed now and to be amended with additional indicators that would address the specific impact that the COVID pandemic has on our LGBTQI communities? All your individual inputs are anonymous, so we just see the collected data.
So do you see how many people worked on this already, or?
Yeah, we work on this as well. It's quite fun. Anonymous.
So just to confirm, now we are not streaming, right? This is only like a closed working meeting at the moment.
No, at the moment we're still streaming. I think we have to go to the breakout room to not streaming.
Okay, tell us where should we go?
So let me see.
Thank you.
So I think you just have to agree and go into the breakout room. So Anbit, you also have to join the breakout room. And Sylvia, I guess you're leaving, right? Or
Wait, Soren is here already. So maybe Soren, you can help us or maybe you can, for this goal, you can present the indicators that you have listed in your Vision 2030. So we can start from there.
As I'm at the moment sharing my screen with for the general plan room, it would be necessary that you maybe share your screen here.
Yeah.
One second. What do you mean with indicators? Do you mean the the mission statement?
And then after every goal, you had indicators in that big document of 70, 80 pages.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you send me that document so I can share it?
Let's see.
So how I understand that we are in the process of making a recommendation letter to City Mannheim. Would it be possible to also email back to you if there is more input we think about?
Definitely.
Soren, this is a question.
Definitely. So I'm pretty sure that the time is too short that we come to really have all things discussed and finalized before the end of the session. That is in, I don't know, 20, 25 minutes. So I already spoke to Biljana that we would like to really work on a more detailed document to also for the other strategic goals of our Mannheim 2030 vision, to have them, to kind of look into in what kind of way they need an amendment or not, due to the actual situation. So of course we would be very open for input from NGOs, but also from not organized persons that want to contribute to include this input into this document then.
Maybe actually one of the recommendations of today can be exactly that maybe you can organize closed meetings, not this public, with streaming and everything, but closed meeting with the people from who are more working with the city, in the city, queer organizations, etc., and to talk about this, about every goal of these 7 goals on that meeting. And how can it be amended?
Yeah, I remember when we did this like a year or 2 ago with like the queer community in general. It was like a 4-hour meeting, but it was way too little time to discuss like all the goals and just how to make them measurable. So I think further meetings would be very beneficial.
And also I think that many people maybe left because they don't feel comfortable to talk like this in front of cameras. Maybe I don't know.
I mean, we definitely could facilitate a second meeting where that is maybe also announced not so short notice, and to invite people to contribute, and that we want to create such a document. And to be honest, I'm also having problems finding the document with all the indicators at the moment. But if we can look into the English version of the mission statement, I guess there are already some hints where maybe we need to make some changes. I mean, I was in a workshop earlier in a lab about public spaces, and I think what was written there and said is that maybe it should be included into the mission statement that public spaces really must ensure security for LGBT people, as many venues are closed at the moment, dialogue groups and self-care groups. Public space is the only way to meet as a queer community, and there it's not always safe. So people are I don't know how, limiting themselves in expressing their identity and meeting people they need and love. And this definitely is very important to make sure that these public spaces are secure for especially vulnerable groups, and to also have like structures, for example, at the police, but also maybe in community structures, where if you are having troubles, for example, experiencing discrimination, but also physical and psychological hard times, then you are able to reach out and to seek help. And other point was to definitely make sure that, like houses for women that are victims of violence, maybe at home, that similar spaces need to be created also for all genders, and that they are inclusive to all genders. Because of course, many gay men, queer youth, trans people that are coming out at the moment when they are locked down with their families in a hostile environment. This causes lots of trauma, and I mean, you all spoke about this. So I guess these could be recommendations for that things like that should be added to the to the general Mannheim mission, to make sure that these public spaces are welcoming, inclusive, and especially safe. Just an information for Biljana. I mean, our plan is to finish this workshop at 14:30, and Manuel also have to leave at latest at 14:35. So this, I think we really should not take much more time. So what are we coming out with results now? Is there a result, or is it just that we need more time and space?
Actually, that is one thing that we need more to talk about. You know, that is the thing, to create this kind of space where queer people can share. Okay, today we've heard the experiences, how the COVID impacted on different groups, but that was the time. We had not enough time to dive in deeper on the vision and how the vision can be amended or complemented with additional activities. But I'm very satisfied of the day, and in the meantime I found the document, but we don't have time now to dive in. I'm honestly very satisfied. Please, both of you raise the hand. Maybe Teresa, then Anbit.
Okay, I think we should definitely even for the day against women's violence, like a week ago or something, and like this today, there's been a lot of mentioning of violence and depression and like sadness that is not measured because nobody sees it. And I think we need security and protection. And sometimes I feel like it's not really included in this sustainable development goals, especially in the language. I don't know if I've missed it, but like definite protection, that is also a job for the city to do. That it's not just our community helping ourselves, because I see that we have this discussion amongst ourselves all the time and there's no other people included that this doesn't connect to, because most straight people for example, they don't live our life, but they also don't have a connection with us in a way that they would even notice what's happening to us. So I think we should advocate for exchange and also for protection and safety.
Anbit, you wanted to say?
I think, Biljana, as you pointed out, I think it's really short amount of time we have in hand. But I really appreciate that we met and we are discussing it, and I think that could be a beginning. And as you pointed out, that we could actually take that as a recommendation as well, that Mannheim city is doing something. I mean, I'm really, really amazed and wonderstruck by all of the wonderful work you are doing and the videos. And I think this could actually encourage many cities elsewhere, with the sister cities Mannheim has, and also the city networks. I think what is really important here that we recommend as a group that with this mission 2030, Mannheim invites all the stakeholders from vulnerable communities, like the intersection we had today for like LGBTI youth, asylum seekers and refugees. We had a trans community. I think it's also important that we bring in people from disabled community and people from mental health issues, and also art community and stuff, and bring them together to get their input for a further revision of the working plan, so we can make the Mannheim path better for other, more better and more kind of rich for other cities to follow, as in the Mannheim path. And that's something really, really interesting for many stakeholders to come in and being able to contribute for a plan from a city, from local level, like finding local solution to globally faced challenges. And that would be really interesting, even if it's not an in-person meeting in Mannheim Rathaus, but like us meeting on Zoom or something in coming months or so.
A question towards Manuel. Do you think that it would be, I mean, Mannheim is just one city. I mean, we're doing quite things and many other cities doing stuff too, but I guess it's also maybe Mannheim is not any other city and you can compare everything, but many discussions are the same maybe, and struggles of the vulnerable groups are the same. So with your experience and as coordinator of the Rainbow City Network, do you think this could be an interesting discussion that we can also have with inviting more cities to contribute and to maybe learn, but also not only learn and listen, but also to share their experiences?
Well, I think, for instance, for what I noted, because I made a lot of notations, different cities, for instance, have specific actions in the specific topics. For instance, Berlin has, in 2019, 20, and also 18 and 17, they created a refugee camp only for queer people, for instance. Rotterdam has worked, I would say, positively on lesbian topics and the visibility of the lesbian community. Berlin and Barcelona, for instance, have also a lot of, let's say, a robust agenda on trans community, for instance. So I think, yes, it would be helpful for this exercise to have their input. And I guess I mean, you and me, we can bring that to the board to see how they, what they think. But in the meantime, we can use the one pages of expresses, because there is record already. What are they doing? And perhaps, for instance, in the case of Berlin, I think that's a very good case. We can deep more and ask to Florencio more information about how, for instance, the queer refugee center or the LGBT queer refugee location is working, right? I mean, he describes briefly what they did. this education, and actually not only to this LGBT refugee camp, but also to all the people involved, so they can, if they identify someone that it's in a, let's say, regular camp, so they can act accordingly. So we can, for instance, ask more details about that. And it's just an example. Of course, there are other cities who have more activities on that. But I mean, that was on the top of my head. Berlin, I think, did a very good job when it came to, because actually the Berlin Senate recognized the LGBT refugees as, let's say, a higher degree for providing help. So I think that's important. And of course, one important thing is that even though cities want to do more, sometimes you cannot compare the budget of Berlin, for instance, to the budget of Leuven, for instance, or to the or even Esch. Probably Esch has a budget and has a lot of money. I mean, I'm talking about our cities, but the community there's no, it's not as big, and the needs are not as big as probably in bigger cities. So I think that will be the only, let's say, tricky thing, who we invite to which topic. That will be just my input. But all of them, I think it's a positive idea. Yeah.
So I think we should go back into the plenary. Is Anbit or Teresa, as Manuel is giving a short wrap up anyway, are one of you able to speak a little bit about the results of this, what we're coming up with, what we think is necessary now as an outcome? Just a few sentences.
What we shared here, it should be shared for the public, for the people who are watching the stream.
Yeah,
so like a conclusion.
Would you like to do it, Teresa? Because you actually pointed out a few things.
I think I could do it, but I think the thing you said was well summing up the challenges that we have instead of a concrete point, because we've all agreed that we need to work on this and we don't really know. And there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be researched and compared. So I think what you've said, like pooling resources and just working on it more, I think that should be our conclusion. Do you think so?
I think it's a very good idea, Teresa and Anbit, if you maybe both just say 3 sentences. And yeah, okay, cool. So then let's leave the breakout session and then go back to the plenary. So I think everybody is back.
Yeah.
So I give you the floor again, Diana.
Thank you, Soren. So we had, because we were left only a few people, so we discussed in general. We did not dive in any strategic goal that Mannheim Vision 2030 has. So I would like to invite both Teresa and Anmit to share the key points of our discussion. And immediately afterwards, I'm happy to invite Manuel Rosas, the coordinator of Rainbow Cities Network, to report on the whole day, and maybe we will see some future steps as well in both of these presentations. So first, Teresa and Anbit.
Okay, hi. So I think summed up, we can say that we've heard a lot of interesting things about how our community is marginalized and how the COVID pandemic has affected us. And while we have some positive developments in regards of looking after our own, I think we definitely are in need for protection and safety, support, and also just learning more. And I think Anbit will go on.
And from this, and also, thank you, Teresa, and also from this discussion today where we all expressed our concerns,
on how COVID-19 is impacting on LGBTI community or queer community in a very special way. That it is encouraged that we shall organize further meetings where we can meet together to discuss how this an amazing path that Mannheim is creating, which can be very interesting and encouraging for many other cities across, also part of international city communities, that LGBTI community or queer community are not left behind. And then there is a revision which can help to make this SDGI goal path better for everyone, where no one is left behind.
You're muted.
Very much, both of you. Now the floor is to Manuel, who had the hardest, difficultest assignment today to report on the whole day. Manuel, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I will try to do my best to fulfill that task. So first and foremost, I want to thank the city of Mannheim to create this space for reflection and to bring all the people who participate along the day. Secondly, I want to thank Søren and Vindiana for leading the conversation and moderating and doing a great job trying to contribute not only to the 230 plan in Mannheim, but also globally, because what actions that we take here are impact everywhere. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender and intersex individuals are an integral part of the cities, and we cannot think of sustainable development or the SDG as the UN has defined them without them. In recent years in Europe and in around the world, the rise of the LGBT community have been under attack, targeting the LGBTI people for political gain. This current situation affects data collection, and that's an important thing for us, for the cities, for the activists. Resources allocation and support to civil society is being challenged or targeted too. As an outcome, the fight against COVID-19, climate change, and other disaster is not waged on a level playing field for our community. Viewing 2020 from the current COVID situation almost seems like a improbable time. We never thought it would happen. In only a matter of months, the dynamic of the world changed drastically, and this emergency affects us all, but the LGBTQ community is being particularly vulnerable, as Max, Anya, and Sylvia expose and Ambit expose today. As I said, in Europe and the LGBT and in the world constitute a significant number of the poor, and COVID just made it more visible. Along the day, we discussed that, and we found out, and we were not impressed, but shocked that the main common pain or the main one of the main problems that our community is facing is psychological constraints, basically, because of this being isolated by our community, which most of the times is where we found a refugee. Additionally, like Max highlighted, treatment like hormone treatment or HIV or even PrEP is being challenged by the same situation because cities and national governments have shifted their attention to COVID, which we understand, but we cannot forget that our community depends on those hormones, on those HIV treatment or PrEP treatment. So that's something that we need to call the attention to our cities, to our representatives, because trans women and gay men still represent the highest number of individuals of our community living with HIV that might lead to develop severe symptoms because of COVID-19. So it's both of them, I mean, twice their target. We also need to remember, and we also need to highlight the need for the government and for our community to pay attention to the queer refugees, because as Anja highlighted, having the borders closed represents that these refugees might end up in situation even worse that even what they, the situation they left for their origin, their countries of origin. So that's something that we understand and we respect the decisions taken by our national governments and also local governments, but we need to highlight that we cannot forget those queer refugees. Finally, I would like to highlight very particularly because our organization and particularly myself, I think the visibility of the lesbian community along the years has been forgotten. And we need to reflect on that because as Sylvia mentioned, 50% of the women who were interviewed as bisexual have been discriminated just for their preference compared to their heterosexual peers. So I think this will wrap up what we have discussed today, including the trans community, the queer refugees, and the lesbians, because, and this I take it closer to my heart, lesbians have fought for the trans community, for the gay community along the years since the movement started. So I think it's our responsibility and moral duty to fight with them, to help them and to make them more visible and to take the position that is being neglected or denied to them. So I will close with that. And I hope I didn't disappoint you guys. Thank you.
Not at all. On contrary, thank you very much for wrapping the whole day in such a short time, but to cover everything that we've talked and to raise all the issues that were raised today. As people in the discussion room and in the panel discussion already said, I hope that this is only one step in the process and that the discussion will continue. I would like to thank everybody who contributed with their inputs, with their thinking, with their critical eye, etc. But I would also like to thank warm-heartedly to the city of Mannheim and to Soren, the LGBTI commissioner in the city, for organizing this debate, for organizing these platforms for the queer voices to be heard and to be taken into account. I'm very happy to meet you all in this kind of setting, and hopefully we can meet in person one day and continue this collaboration. I wish you all a nice day and even better weekend. Bye all.
So the last sentence would be mine. I really thank you all a lot. It was a very interesting session. The International Lab gave lots of insights, and also I learned a lot that I try to take into account when I do my work in the future. And as Biljana already said, I also agree. This is the beginning point of a process, and I'm pretty sure it's not over because this was just too short. And there are so many more things to be said and to be done to make sure that the goal of Agenda 2030, not leaving one behind, is really successful. So we keep fighting for this. I'm looking forward to invite you all to this discussion and process to see how what now COVID showed us, what kind of impact such extreme situation can have, especially on the marginalized groups, that we learn from that for more inclusive society and especially the cities. And I'm pretty sure we will continue with this discussion also in our global networks. One last thank you, very, very big one, is towards Biljana. You really did a great job facilitating this workshop, and I'm very, very happy that I was able to work with you. Hopefully, I still have the chance to do this in the future again. And yeah, thank you all for participating. We're sharing then a transcription and also the videos on the Facebook group, the Facebook event of this international lab, and I'm pretty sure also in the overall documentation of the Thinkers Campus Mannheim 2020. Thank you all and wish you a great day. Have a nice time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much all.